Whatever science states on any subject, the reverse will ultimately prove to be true. That we are approaching knowledge far too superficially. He makes a number of statements. He develops one theme at considerable length, which is reminiscent of our more recent discoveries in vitamins, something at that time not generally considered. The mysterious author, for example, points out that if we take any food that we know and commonly use, and we analyze it, and we get the chemical formula which is contained in that food, then we go to a pharmaceutical house or a drugstore or anywhere else and buy those chemicals. And then we put them together in a jar or a bottle in exactly the proportion that they appear in the original foodstuff. And then drink the formula. One of several things may happen. The first thing is that nothing will happen. The second is that we will become deathly sick. And the third thing possible is that we will kill ourselves. We will kill ourselves from the exact formula of food which in its proper and reasonable form maintains life. From this basic thinking, the author of the book points out that what we call nutrition is not merely man taking into his system materials derived from other forms in nature, that these forms are all of them merely catalysts for agents which we do not understand, do not know, and which we cannot copy artificially, and that therefore it is not the food or the formula of the food, but something else that has to be present, and that this invisible something else is a pure life substance which cannot be artificially manufactured, will not result from the compounding of known elements or substances, but is placed there and is present there by the alchemy of nature, which man cannot reproduce. This was one of the points which he established in his book, which no doubt would have been known, at least potentially, by John Uri Lloyd, or could have been speculatively contemplated by him. Thus, there are a number of these little episodes which might suggest the trained physicist or the trained chemist. But there are others in which no amount of training, such as we have today, would in any way explain the mystery of the subject. So we have many different elements and factors involved and combined to make this a very curious and difficult book. That parts of it are utterly fantastic, we cannot deny. One of the points which perhaps we must also give a moment to is this inter-earth cosmogony, if we want to call it such. According to the concept as set forth by Adorno, the Earth's interior parts should not be regarded as we generally think of them. Science fiction today has many parallel stories of worlds under the earth, of people living there, of all kinds of things happening there. Now, to a measure, Adorno follows some of these, but in a rather reduced manner, a rather epitomized form. Adorno does not, generally speaking, go into the idea of a great civilization existing under the earth. That is not part of the concept. Part of the concept apparently is that there are regions under the earth, that these regions have some mysterious relationship with the earth's surface, that things happening below the surface are in many instances the causes of things occurring on the surface, that there are motions from within the earth by means of which great changes and conditions arise upon the surface of the earth, that there are explanations beneath the earth's surface for most of the things that happen up above, and that these happenings are a motion from a within outward. Now let us assume for a moment that there could be a highly symbolical interpretation of this book, and that we are supposed to recognize the story of the adventure as a person forced into his own inner life either by conscience or by necessity, that he moves from the surface of his own nature, which for the average person would be his earth surface. And many times in the book this is intimated. And it's one of the confusing points, because one moment it seems almost certain that we are dealing with a psychological story. Some of the more extravagant parts of the story are actually introduced as dream circumstances occurring to this person under the earth. He is not only under the earth, but also subjected to dream circumstances. But if we should imagine for a moment that by some mysterious route, as indicated in the story, at least figuratively, the individual moves from his own externity, his own outer life, toward an internal state of himself. Or we might say that a person banished by punishment, losing the association of his fellow men, must then develop his own resources in order to survive. And like Robinson Crusoe cast away on a desert island, whose adventures became the basis of the whole concept of modern philosophic humanism, we have in this story the possibility of a man going inside. And instead of finding the inside of his life to be merely composed of bones, muscles, and organs, he gradually comes to realize that there is within him an unperceived supersubstantial universe, that there is a world inside of him, just exactly as there is a world around him in nature. The difference being, as the book would intimate, that this world inside of him is forever moving toward the surface. This would be good psychology. That from the strange underworld of his own subconscious and unconscious, from the strange regions of his own psychic experiences, from his fears, frights, and longings, which are very clearly set forth in the story, the individual can symbolically experience an investigation of his own soul. That his own inner psyche is therefore a strange and mysterious world with many levels and stratifications, but that most of all this internal world is bound to the external, and that the external world is a kind of efflorescence of it, that as certain lime forms on the surface of stone, being exuded from the stone itself, so the surface of the earth is exuded from its inner invisible body, and the temperament, disposition, appearance, characteristic, and attitude of man is something exuded from his own soul, passing outward into his body, and from this into objective manifestation. If we assume this, we are very close, perhaps, to an understanding of a part of the story. This becomes much more dominant after the hero of the story meets Adadopha. Now, Adadopha, as you probably have already noticed, is nothing but the word Aphrodite spelt backwards. And Aphrodite was the ancient goddess of love, and in the story of Adadopha appears as the redeeming power of love. Now, traveling inward through a series of psychic experiences, it would be quite conceivable that man might discover the inward power of love over the life that he outwardly leads. It would represent truly a transformation of the very hate which perhaps at one time caused this man to attempt to work this injury upon his friends. Furthermore, however, as we go on, we find that the hero of the story ultimately reaches what he calls the end of earth. Now, the end of earth, in this case, is a kind of jumping-off place, a place from which he can step, as from the edge of a great cliff. But once he has stepped into this infinity, he steps into an absoluteness that is beyond description, beyond analysis, beyond recording. Therefore, as the hero of the book explains it, the story ends with the end of earth. When he has to go beyond this point, he goes to a place of no return. If he goes beyond this point, he goes to a condition utterly undescribable by man, into a condition of absoluteness, which, however, as described in the book, takes on many of the dimensions and aspects and values of the ancient Buddhistic concept of nirvana. The place to which he would go is the place of absolute peace, of absolute rest, and a place which he can attain only by the total renunciation of himself. This again leads us into the suspicion that we are dealing with a pageantry of initiation into the mysteries.